Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video we are going to continue our work on painting the Satan shard of the Void Dragon. And in this video we are going to work on the base, being the little stones and of course the, the base itself, of course. This is effectively part 5 of this little series, just for anybody who's trying to keep track. Demonette Hide is the color we're going to use here, and this is the base color. We're going to slap a little bit onto our palette, and we're going to apply a generous amount of water to thin the color down. Really, I'm only thinning this down just because I want it to flow nicely into the recesses, and if I make a little boo-boo hitting into any of the little areas, like the lightning itself, I can always clean it up and, just basically error correct kind of thing. That's the reason why oftentimes I do work in a very thin colors, just so that in case there are other painted areas on the model that we can always come back and correct and fix things, kind of fix problems before they become problems kind of thing. And because we have the paint in such a thinned out state, it's not terribly thin, but I mean, like, you can obviously see some of the primer showing through. And for some of those out there who might be forgetting what primer we used, it is a gloss black Stanel Res. It was applied by airbrush, and I'm applying this paint right on top of it. And you can see even in the paint in its thinned out consistency, it adheres pretty darn good just in that first single coating onto the areas. This is after 2 coats. We're going to use some Demonette Hide. We're also going to use some Abaddon Black. Now, really quickly here, I could just as easily glaze up some shadows and things like that, but I really just, didn't really feel like it. So we're going to apply some black on its own and the Demonette Hide onto the palette, and I'm going to do a 2-brush wet blend. And basically all I do is I lay a little bit of Abaddon Black down, I take a brush with a load of Demonette Hide and begin blending the color out. As I work my way around, if the color doesn't seem dark enough, then I simply come back in with a bit more black and blend it in. If the shadow isn't as high as I want, I bring it down, and if it's a little too far, then I blend it back upwards. When we are working in this fashion, you do have to be quick. I would highly recommend anybody out there to give it a try as far as doing a 2-brush wet blend. It is a very fast way of getting these initial transitions down, especially when you're trying to create a directional type of shadowing. If we're going to go about it in the conventional sense, you could just simply slap a shade wash onto these areas and kind of be done with it. Whereas I was going for a bit more of a directional light sourcing on this, and I wanted to push the shadows in one direction, basically not quite like a non-metallic metal fashion, but is sort of in that same vein. I wanted the color to get darker up higher on each of the stones. On the base itself, I work the black into the recesses, and then you can see here I am just very quickly just basically stippling the color and blending the color and leaving most of the black to reside within the recesses, or more of the black I should say. It's really, I was kind of just eyeballing to what tone I wanted there. Now, Demonette Hide is not the brightest of colors, so if you don't have very good lighting, you can have a bit of trouble trying to discern what colors you're dealing with and how far you're working a color. So do be mindful of that. Of course, always having good lighting is key when doing miniature painting, but of course, knowing what colors you're working with and how far you want to push them also helps as well. But you can see here it's a fairly quick process. I just come in, slap some black down, and then I come back in with the Demonette Hide, and then I just really kind of roughly stipple it onto the surface, but creating that blend. And as we push the color around, you'll see that we do build it towards a darker tone in the recesses, but really I'm laying it down and just kind of scrubbing it around, and any of the mixed tone that I like, I'll push to other areas where I wanted to have that darker tone. And of course I can also quickly clean off the brush, and while it's still slightly damp, pull off some of that excess color, and in fact basically working it like a feathering motion where I still want to have a brighter tone of, say, Demonette Hide underneath, or anything, whatever colors you happen to be using. But this is essentially it, and realistically, like, it does not take long to get that done. Just give it some time to dry. We're going to come in with some Warp Fiend Gray. I'm going to use a larger dry brush for this. Both of these are Citadel products. We're painting a Citadel model. We might as well use Citadel paints. See, I have the brush just halfway loaded with color, wipe most of the paint off, and then very, very lightly, I begin dry brushing. And you can see here how I'm being very deliberate with my brush stroke, as I want to capture the brighter points along the bottom portions of each of the details, where the color is closer to Demonette High, the base tone. I want to build that brightness downwards, kind of like, like non-metallic metal, or how we do like gemstones or anything like that. Now, I wasn't going for that particular effect. It was just an aesthetics choice, essentially. When we are dry brushing, of course, we are being, very careful not to hit any of the other areas, especially if we've already finished off that lightning. Now, the lightning itself has only been base coated, so I'm not really that concerned with getting any of this color on there. And of course, we are dry brushing, so it would require a lot of pressure to transfer some of that color onto those details, which doesn't really occur unless it's really close to the boulder itself. So I really wasn't that worried about it either. And of course, when you are dry brushing, be sure to maintain a very light hand. You want to be very, very gentle when you're applying it. Be deliberate of your brush stroke, how you're applying the paint. Some areas, you want to go in just one direction. Sometimes it calls for a semicircular direction. It is entirely up to you how you apply that color and how you build it up. But of course, as you are working your way around, doing more brush strokes to certain areas builds that color more intensely. So each of those little bottom portions of each of those little boulders was, more dry brushing was applied to it. Terminus Stone is next. This is a Citadel Dry. I'm going to use that same brush, but I did wash it in brush soap, so there was no color transference. But in this instance, I'm not that concerned with color transference. And here, again, you can see I'm being very, very deliberate how I'm applying this brush stroke. And again, there's a lot of paint removed, so it's very, very little pressure, very, very light. It's not a lot of paint being transferred to the model. I'm just looking to get just that bottom portion, just a little bit of the brightness. You can see on that lightning there, it's got a little bit of paint there. I'm not too worried about it because, again, the lightning hasn't been fully rendered yet, so it is not a huge concern. It's really just base coated at this point, so I can just simply just paint over it and, be done with it kind of thing. So I'm not, hugely concerned about it. As we are applying this brush stroke onto the surface, again, I'm concentrating towards the bottom portion of each of those little boulders. Again, it's a visual choice. It's an aesthetics choice, I should say. And it is, if you're going about this, you can dry brush the entirety of the boulder or choose one end of the boulder and, highlight it in whatever fashion you want. But in this color scheme that I was going for, I wanted the base to be quite dark so it will contrast nicely with the lightning. I'm going to use some Basilicum Gray. This is Citadel Contrast. I'm going to use a very generous amount of Contrast Medium. Basically, I apply 2 dollops of contrast, and then I use the Contrast Medium, and I do about 2 or 3 dollops of that, thin the color down. And the reason for this is to reestablish the darker tone. It doesn't really look like it on the screen here, but it actually is a lot brighter. And so with the Basilicum on here, it takes it way down, and that's really closer to what I was looking for. And it also reestablishes some of those little details on the rocks, like the nooks and crannies and the rocks cracks and, all these little things going on. But I don't allow it to pool up too heavily in any areas. And as I'm working the color, I do want more of the color to build towards the high points on each of those boulders, right where we laid more black down. I do want to have more of the contrast color on those portions, so oftentimes I will draw a lot of the excess off the bottom portion of each of the little boulders so that it doesn't really interfere with the brighter tones we had previously created. Again, we're being fairly mindful, but you can see here I'm just kind of slapping this onto the model. The entirety of the base gets done in this fashion just so it picks out all those little details. And of course, with the rocks and everything like that, doing that dry brushing helps really kind of bring together that rough texture on it. Now here is all cleaned up, and the lightning was rendered out, and then of course a very thin gloss varnish was applied to the model. Basically it was Future Floor Shine I used, but any gloss varnish that you happen to have on hand. I'm going to use titanium white from Golden High Flow paint line with a drop or two of Liquitex Flow Aid. These are both water-based acrylic paint lines, so they do mix just fine because they're water-based acrylics. And the whole reason for the Flow Aid is so that as I apply the titanium white into the recesses here, it gathers, and see here I can wipe the excess paint away off the surface. That's because I have that varnish layer down, because I knew I was going to be doing this technique on here, so I didn't want to, any excess pressure pulling at that paint that is on each of those boulders. I wanted to protect that. So that is the whole reason for the gloss varnish, is so that the paint also flows easily on the surface. When doing this kind of technique, especially where you're using the paint to flow into recesses, having a gloss varnish down first helps the paint with the surface tension, and it will flow within those recesses much easier, and you can wipe it away, and you can be relatively confident that you're not going to ruin your paint job. Golden High Flow Fluorescent Pink is next, with a drop of Flow Aid and a generous amount of water. Basically, we're just turning this into a nice thin color so that it'll flow into the recesses here. And I will apply this more than once into these little, these little rune details here. We're just kind of going for a bit of a glowing impression in here. I also come back, I do believe, and highlight these as well, just to create a little bit more glow towards the center of them, just to create a little bit interesting look. And again, this is really just kind of roughing it out, and I will apply it twice into each of those little details. And then, of course, I'll come back into some white here, the remainder of the titanium white, and I'll mix it into the remainder of the fluorescent pink. Just give me kind of closer to a 50-50 mix. And then here you can see I'm just applying this around the rings just to make it a little bit brighter. And of course, I just use my finger to wipe the excess away. In some of the more hard to reach places, it's a little bit trickier, but I'm sure you'll manage. Quinacridone Magenta is next. This is Golden High Flow. This is not a transparency. This is an opaque color. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm using my detail brush and I'm painting the inner wall. So there's how the detail, the rune itself recesses into the stone. Well, I'm painting that inner wall. And because we're using this really nice Quinacridone Magenta, it really makes that fluorescent pink really stand out. Abaddon Black and Demonette Hide, mixing these roughly a 1-to-1, and this is just to clean up some of those areas because we have this nice dark tone, which essentially is that blend. The color is just thinned out with a little bit of dampness of the brush, and we can apply this to clean up some of the areas that we have a little excess amount of, say, the titanium white or the magenta or what have you. But after it's all said and done, you can see it's all cleaned up. And here we are. We got a nice looking little base so far. Astro Granite Citadel Texture is next. We're going to use a texture brush to apply this, just because. I just grab a very generous amount and begin patting it around the edge. And I'm also allowing it to build up close to where the plastic detail and the base meet up so that this texture feels uniform across the entirety of the base. So I am quite generous with how it gets closer towards the sculpted details as opposed to just the flatness of the base, as it were. But otherwise, it's really not a whole lot. I'm just looking for that texture on the surface, and this bottle was actually getting near the end, so there was some portions that were just like really kind of heavy, chunky kind of stuff, but I use it anyway. I'm not too concerned. I use the spatula to clean the rim as well as we work our way around. Again, I'm not too worried about the rim at the moment because we're just going to finish that off black. The whole reason why we're doing the base in this fashion is because it will match with the rest of my Necrons. After a few hours, let it dry. We're going to come in with some Skaven Blight Dinge. Slap a little bit onto the palette, just the dampness of the brush to thin the color out ever so slightly. And this is for all that little sandy, pebbly type of detail that's on the sculpted part of the base. Basically, I had not painted those at all in this portion. I had considered using the Demonette Hide just so that kind of, show like it was kind of a, rocky dust or whatever. But I decided to just go for this ash and everything like that. Now, I did want it to be a bit darker, but not so dark and so different from the Astro Granite. We could have used Eshin Gray, I believe. It's probably closer to tone, or even Mechanicus Gray, closer to tone to Astro Granite, but I didn't really feel like going that route. I actually wanted a bit darker and some slight variance in color with these tones on the base, because it's much more interesting when there is a slight color variance. Longbeard is next. This is the Citadel Dry. I'm going to use a large dry brush to apply this, and very carefully I'm working my way around the base. I'm keeping a very light hand as I dry brush around the perimeter of the details, trying to get all the little sandy texture. I'm also going to apply more brush stroke towards the outer rim of the base so it gets brighter towards the outer edges. leaving just some of the high points. Now some of the stone gets a little bit of dry brush, and I kind of liked how it changed that value. The terminus stone and this longbeard, they're fairly close, especially when they're thinned out like this on a surface. And so, you know, I really wasn't that concerned if it got onto any of the rocks, because it would just look kind of, you know, similar, and I wasn't really that concerned about it. So, you know, it was, you know, again, aesthetics choice, and, you know, but there it is. That is the base. In the next video, we will continue to look at probably the backpack with that little tail sword punchy thing. I don't know what that is, but that is the base. And, you know, it's pretty straightforward. Well, we still have more of the model to do, but stay tuned for more. Big thank you to all my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below. You'll be taken off to a magical website called Patreon, where there's varying tiers of support, and a huge thank you to everybody who does. Take care of those brushes, and they will take care of you.